The history of the three rings of the elves, Vilya, Nenya, and Narya, is a tale woven with the subtle threads of power, foresight, and peril. These rings, unlike the 7 and the 9, were not forged for dominion, but for preservation, untouched by Sauron's direct influence. And yet, the question lingers in the minds of many. Could they have been wielded against the Dark Lord himself? To answer this, we must delve deep into their origins, the nature of their power, and the constraints laid upon them by the forging of the One Ring. The three were crafted in circa 1590 of the Second Age, after Celebrimbor, the Lord of Eregion and Master Smith of the Gwaith I Myrdain, reached the pinnacle of his craft. He wrought them in secret, independently of Sauron's direct guidance, making them the purest of the rings of power. Vilya, the Ring of Air, was a sapphire-set band that bore the greatest might. Nenya, the Ring of Water, was wrought of mithril and adorned with a gem-like starlight. And Nenya, the Ring of Fire, was a golden ring that inspired courage and resistance against despair. Unlike the rings given to men and dwarves, these were never tainted with greed or the promise of personal gain. Only the desire to shield and preserve the beauty of Middle-earth. Yet they were bound to the One Ring by Sauron's craft, for he had imparted much of his knowledge into their making before Celebrimbor turned against him. When Sauron revealed the One Ring in 1600 of the Second Age, proclaiming his dominion over all the rings, the bearers of the three, aware of their peril, removed them from use. Celebrimbor realized that his greatest works were now under threat, and he sought to keep them from Sauron's grasp. In the ensuing War of the Elves and Sauron 1-693-170-1 he was captured and slain, but before he fell, he ensured that the three were sent far from Eregion. Vilya and Narya went to Gil-galad, High King of the Noldor, while Nenya was given to Galadriel. Yet even with the might of Gil-galad and Elrond, the elves could not halt Sauron's advance, and Rivendell itself was only established as a last refuge, rather than a fortress of defiance. This raises the question, if these rings were so powerful, why were they not used in open war? The answer lies in the very nature of the three rings. Unlike the one, which was designed for dominion and subjugation, the three were made to heal, preserve, and enhance. They did not grant their bearers the ability to strike down foes with fire or to bend the will of others, but instead they slowed decay, shielded against time's ravages, and fortified the spirit. Their power was subtle, not the force of war but the endurance of peace. When wielded, they strengthened the lands they protected. Lothlorien flourished under Nenya, Imladris remained a hidden sanctuary with Vilya, and Narya, when it came to Gandalf's hand, kindled hearts against despair. However, their greatest strength was also their greatest weakness. They were inextricably linked to the One Ring, and as long as it endured, their fate was bound to its master. If Sauron regained the One, he would not need to seize the three by force. He could command them utterly, twisting their power to his will. The elves, wise beyond reckoning, understood this grim truth. Thus, they dared not wield the three against him, for even if they sought to use them in defiance, their power would serve him in the end. Moreover, the nature of Sauron's dominion was not one that the three could counteract directly. His strength lay in brute force, terror, and corruption, and the three rings were not weapons against such things. They could preserve the beauty of elven realms, but they could not unmake the darkness of Mordor. Even if Elrond, Galadriel, or Círdan had chosen to openly wield their rings in war, it would have been akin to using a shield against a storm. Protection, perhaps, but no means of victory. Yet, despite these limitations, the three were not without influence in the struggle against Sauron. Vilya strengthened Rivendell, allowing it to become a stronghold of wisdom and refuge, where the free peoples could gather and counsel. Nenya protected Lothlorien, keeping it from decay and preserving the Golden Wood against the encroachments of time. And Nenya, in the hands of Gandalf, became a source of hope and resilience, unseen yet vital in the battle against despair. Their power was not in the clashing of swords, but in the quiet resistance against fading and fear. Even during the War of the Ring in 3018-3019 of the Third Age, when the fate of Middle-earth hung by a thread, the three remained hidden. Galadriel could have wielded Nenya to shield Lothlorien against the assault of Dol Guldur, but had she done so in open defiance, it would have drawn Sauron's gaze fully upon her. Instead, she used its power subtly, maintaining the veil that kept Lothlorien hidden from his direct sight. Likewise, Elrond did not summon the strength of Vilya to crush Sauron's forces, for the very act would have betrayed his position, making Rivendell a primary target. The elves understood that their rings were not tools for conquest, but for preservation, and as long as the One Ring existed, they could only act in secrecy. The notion of using the three rings against Sauron also raises another question. Could they have been wielded by another, perhaps in a desperate bid to overthrow the Dark Lord? Theoretically, if an elf lord such as Elrond or Galadriel had attempted to use Vilya or Nenya in open defiance, the result would have been disastrous. The three, though powerful, could not directly challenge the One, for their very nature was tied to its existence. Any attempt to use them in such a manner would have only strengthened Sauron's dominion, for he alone understood the full craft that bound all the rings of power. As stated in The Lord of the Rings, if he regains it, your valor is vain, and his victory will be swift and complete. Even more perilous was the temptation they posed. Galadriel herself acknowledged this when she was offered the One Ring by Frodo. Though she wielded Nenya, she knew that should she take the one, she would become a queen stronger than the foundations of the earth. Yet she would be no less terrible than Sauron himself. All shall love me and despair, she proclaimed, before resisting the temptation and declaring, I pass the test. This moment reveals an essential truth about the nature of power in Middle-earth. Even those who seek to use it for good risk corruption. The three rings, though untainted by Sauron's hand, could not be wielded against him without ultimately playing into his design. It is also worth considering the hypothetical scenario in which Sauron had been overthrown, but the One Ring had survived. If Isildur had kept it, or if another had claimed it without destroying it, the three would have remained in effect. In such a world, Rivendell, Lothlorien, and the hidden havens of the elves would have endured longer, their beauty preserved against the decay of time. Yet, even then, they would not have been able to establish lasting peace. The mere existence of the One Ring ensured that its influence would always loom over Middle-earth. As Elrond said, the strength of the elves is gone. We must diminish and go into the west, or we shall become a rustic folk of dell and cave, slowly to forget and to be forgotten. In contrast, with the destruction of the One Ring in March of 3019, the three lost their power. No longer bound to the Dark Lord's fate, they began to fade. Their great works, Rivendell's enchantments, Lothlorien's timeless beauty, could not be maintained, and the elves finally accepted that their time in Middle-earth was ending. This was the ultimate cost of victory, the undoing of the preservation they had so long sought. Yet, in the grand scheme of things, this was the design of Iluvatar, the will that wove the music of the Ainur. The power of the elves was never meant to endure forever, and the breaking of the rings signaled the passing of the torch to men, the destined rulers of the world. In the end, the three rings of the elves could never have been used as weapons against Sauron. They were not meant for conquest, nor could they undo the Dark Lord's might directly. Their purpose was preservation, a noble yet ultimately fleeting attempt to hold back the tide of time. And so, with the fall of the One Ring, their chapter in the story of Middle-earth came to an end. The bearers, Elrond, Galadriel, and Gandalf, departed across the sea, taking the last remnants of the Elder Days with them. Middle-earth was left to men, who would now shape its fate without the guidance of immortal hands. Thus we come to the final understanding of the Three Elven Rings and their place in the great struggle against Sauron. While they could not be used as weapons of war, they were never meant for such a purpose. They served as beacons of light in a darkening world, preserving what beauty remained even as the shadows deepened. Their power was not in battle, but in defiance. Defiance against the slow decay of time, against despair, and against the withering of all things fair. Without them, Rivendell would not have endured as a bastion of wisdom, nor would Lothlorien have remained an untouched paradise amidst the growing darkness of the Third Age. Yet their fate was inescapably linked to the One Ring. The very moment it was unmade in the fires of Mount Doom, the three lost their potency. Though the elves had wielded them in secret, Sauron's destruction sealed their doom. The cost of Middle-earth's salvation was the passing of its last great wonders, a bittersweet ending foretold long before the final war. With the departure of the ring-bearers across the sea, the age of magic and wonder faded into legend, and a new world, one governed by men, began. This is why the three rings could never have been wielded against Sauron in open defiance. Their strength lay in preservation, not in destruction, and their wielders knew that to use them in direct opposition to the Dark Lord would be to play into his hands. In the end, the true victory over Sauron came not through power, but through renunciation. Frodo, the smallest and least of all warriors, did not strike the Dark Lord down. He merely bore the burden of the One Ring, until fate intervened. Galadriel, Elrond, and Gandalf understood this well. They did not seek to challenge Sauron with their rings, but instead worked quietly, preparing the world for the day when the One Ring would be undone. And so, Middle-earth changed forever. The age of the elves waned, their time in the lands of men finally at an end. But their legacy endured, not in power nor in dominion, but in the beauty they had preserved, the wisdom they had shared, and the hope they had kindled. The passing of the three was not a loss, but a fulfillment of destiny. The story of Middle-earth moved forward, and the echoes of the elder days faded into history, remembered only in song and story. And with that, we close this chapter in the lore of Middle-earth. If you enjoyed this journey into the mysteries of the Three Rings, be sure to share your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think the elves could have done more with their rings? Or was their choice the only path forward? Until next time, may the stars shine upon your road. Namari.